Good morning, everybody. Welcome to our talk. We're talking about getting started in open source. Um, just do the next slide. There, pictures, so you know what we look like, in case you're wondering. I'm Shaun McCance. I am Shaun M and sometimes Shaun X on various platforms. Um, I've been involved in open source for over 20 years or so. I got my start working on GNOME. I worked on the documentation platforms and the documentation and joined the board, served as president, treasurer, various things. Did various other stuff, and I now work at Red Hat as the CentOS community architect, where I nurture the CentOS project and take care of its various non-technical needs.
Hi, I'm Amy Marrich. I am known as Spots because I have Dalmatians. I am the chair of the CentOS Board of Directors. I am the co-chair of the Open Infra Foundation governing board, and I am on the Chaos board. The interesting thing is those are three totally different projects. We're talking infrastructure as a service, an operating system, and community health and metricing. So your interests can go anywhere. There are open source projects that can meet your needs. I like to say I've been in open source since before it was cool. We were the only open source group using Python in a company where I was a software development manager. But I really got into contributing to open source as a system administrator and as an operator. So you can get in from all different directions. I also like to tell people I'm an animal science major with a master's in extension education. I do not have a science background. So you do not need to be a computer science major to get involved in open source. All right, so we've got a couple larger topics that we're going to talk about, but this is really a conversation for y'all. We're also going to be down at the booth if you want to continue conversations, because we're here to help you. We're not just here to give a talk. So we're going to talk about why you should contribute. What do you get out of it? How to get started. Different roles in communities, because depending on the size of the community, there's different roles involved that you can get involved in. Some key takeaways and Q&A. Can you just let me know when you want to take over? Sure. Okay. I also talk fast, so slow me down. So why would you even want to contribute? And I mentioned this to a couple people at the CentOS and Fedora table earlier. Real world experiences. If you're a college student and you have never had a job, guess what? Open source code contributions counts on your resume. It's also a really good way to make connections. The connect is a referral, a mentor, a sponsor. Oftentimes that person knows someone at a different company who's looking to hire if they're not hiring themselves. So again, you now have this big ecosystem of people who go, hey, I know their skill set. I don't have a position. Hey, do you have a position? They would be a really great QE person. They'd be a really great Python developer. So that helps to expand what you might just have going to Indeed or Google Jobs or somewhere. So it's a great way of finding out jobs that don't even exist really officially on, it's like, hey, I'm kind of looking for this, but, I haven't really put the rec out there. Oh, I know someone who would be great for that rec. As soon as you're ready, this is a great person.
And that's exactly how I got hired at Red Hat. So, I said I got my start in open source over 20 years ago in the GNOME project. That was entirely volunteer work. I had a real job. When I got brought into Red Hat, like my interview process was all about my open source contributions. Nobody asked me anything about my real work. So a job in open source can be a real thing that you get out of your open source experience.
And I have continued working in open source on OpenStack, even when not working at a company that used OpenStack. In fact, before I came to Red Hat, I was at a company that was doing open source educational software. I put in a resume and a job application at Red Hat. They saw everything I do on OpenStack. I got an interview. I was hired within a week. Sometimes it is not that quick a process, Depending on a manager's experience with the recruitment team, sometimes it can take 6 months till you get contacted. But in my case, my boss had lost people, so he kept on the recruitment team. So also don't be scared if it takes a while to get called or to get the interview or to get a job offer. Now this one we've kind of hinted at. Like I said, I've worked on OpenStack even when I wasn't being paid to work on OpenStack. I think it's fun. I love my community. I give back all the time. But I also mentioned that I started as a system administrator. You're working on a piece of code. You find a typo in a man page, on an error message. The code's doing the opposite thing you think it should do. File a bug, but even more importantly, file that bug and then put a patch up. Fix it yourself if you can. But even that bug report is a contribution. You want to add anything before I go on?
No.
Okay.
I think it's immensely fun, which is why I started doing it.
We're here because it's fun. So getting started. How do you find your project? So most projects nowadays are on either GitHub or GitLab. There are a few that self-host. OpenStack is one of those. We host on our own infrastructure called openinfra.dev. But for the most part, all your projects are on GitHub, GitLab. Having basic Git skills, which we had a discussion on at the booth earlier, very important. Identify your interests and skills. I was working with cloud software, so I donated to cloud software. Run Linux at home, got involved with an operating system. I like data, got involved with a metricing program. So see where your needs are, and there's everything in open source from medical to computers. Like I said, metricing and community health. So you don't have to just go to something you think is there. You open up your horizons and go where your interests are, because there's probably an open source project that touches on that. Projects with good documentation, it's a flip. Some projects have really good documentation because, as you're going to find out, there's a role called tech writers that improve your documentation immensely. But you're going to need at least enough documentation to get started to see where you can start. Most projects on GitHub, GitLab have a README in a contributor.md. Hopefully they have enough information for you to actually get started.
And having good documentation is good because it makes your life easier. But sometimes a project with not quite as good documentation as it could have can give you an opportunity to contribute. I got my start actually helping out with the documentation systems in GNOME. My friend Rich Bowen got his start doing documentation for Apache. So if you're good at explaining things, that's a good opportunity. But a base level of documentation on how to contribute is going to help you a lot. Like if you don't even know how to file a patch or who to talk to, that's going to be very problematic, right?
And another thing from good documentation or a good website for a project is going to show you where that community meets to have meetings. IRC used to be a big one. A lot of us have moved to Matrix, but there's multiple Matrix servers. So finding where that project meets and starting conversations. So start small, beginner friendly. Who's been to that Podman desk downstairs with the cute little seals? Have you noticed the QR code? The QR code takes you to a bunch of first-time user bugs. And basically, if you do one of those little bugs, you get one of the little really cute seals. I should get a seal just for giving them a pitch.
Yeah.
But yeah, so those first issues are usually small enough. Some of them were like documentation issues that you could probably do on your computer here and get your seal. Some of them were code-based, going to take a little more time, but still an inviting, easy to fill bug that you can put some code in. As I just mentioned, look for beginner-friendly tags. They have different terms. It could be first-time user, low-hanging fruit is one I've seen. So look for the ones that seem easy, that have a tag, that draw your attention. Some will have, a page where it is just, hey, these are a great place for you to start, and make your first contribution. Some of the projects also have, I think Fedora calls theirs the join sig.
Fedora has the join sig, yeah. A lot of projects have doesn't have, a sig is a very technical term, but like some sort of working group, team, or whatever, that like their job is to help you find a place where you can contribute. So if you find projects that have a team like that, definitely go talk to their beginner team.
Yeah, in OpenStack we had one called First Contact Sig, and then later Chaos has a first time newcomer channel. They use Slack, so again another tool, but someplace where it's very easy to find where you should go to join in conversations. So we've already kind of mentioned Slack Matrix. Join the mailing list, join those places so you have a place where you can start a conversation, because the conversations are really what get you going in a community. Introduce yourself. Hi, I'm Amy. I'm kind of bored at work. How can I get involved? I added tags for translations. That's how I got hooked. Really easy. Understand the project's culture. So, and this is important in that every culture is different. And you hear stories about, they're not welcoming or whatever. But sometimes you find the right group. I like to describe this as finding your tribe, to use a more modern term for this. You're going to get there, you're going to talk to a couple of people, and you're going to go, yes, these are my people. I understand. And it's not just the people, the project as well should call to you. So start your conversations, get involved.
And sometimes to find that culture, it helps to lurk a little bit, in their channels. You should 100%, when you join the channels, say hello and introduce yourself. But maybe don't go in there and dominate the whole conversation with your life story, right? Like, it can be very enlightening to just sit on somebody's channel and watch how they communicate and get a feel for that culture, and if it's a place where you enjoy being, so.
Yeah, I mean, and also one thing to take into consideration is English not as a first language, because there's one contributor, sometimes me and him will butt heads on channel because he's trying to find the words, but yet we have the best conversations in person. And we're really just saying the same thing, but going about it different ways because of understanding the language. So do take that into consideration and ask questions of, do you really mean this or do you mean this? Because text isn't always the greatest place to start, but at the same time, it is very equaling, because I log into a channel as Spots now. These days, most communities know who I am, but no one knew who I was. So I earned trust and earned my place in a community based on who I was on my contributions. And you say, oh, we need this done. I'm like, okay, I'll do it. I'll go do that. So that's a good way of earning. If you see something that comes up and that's something you can do, just volunteer for it. But if you volunteer for it, follow through with it. So we mentioned also feedback and reporting issues, a great way to get started. You're using the software and you find something wrong. Even if you can't necessarily solve the problem, letting them know it's a problem, because they may never have thought that way. Corner cases are a great one for that. You are the only one using that software in that way. They never thought of it. So having a bug in a conversation on what you're trying to do gives understanding. And as Shaun already mentioned, participate in discussions, forums, join meetings. Great way to get started. So roles in communities, and we've broken this out. So there's roles that are in every community. Developers contribute. Actually, we have this on 2-1.
Oh, we left a fix me in.
We did. That was the slide I was looking for earlier. This is why we're a team.
That was me telling us that we should put slides in later, and then we put slides in later.
So actually, do we even need this one anymore? Let's go to developer key roles. So what do developers do? They contribute high quality code, we hope. and fix bugs. In a smaller community, they're going to do, we have 10 minutes left. Review and test the code from other contributors. They're going to engage actively in community discussions, and they're going to create the documentation and hopefully helpful tutorials, because they're the only ones involved in the project. We have doubles, dude. Users, people who actually use your code. They are an important part in your small community because they're actually using and testing the software. They're reporting the issues and providing feedback. Again, those corner cases that no one thought of. And they participate in discussions to give that feedback. And hopefully they create documentation and tutorials because they actually use it. Now, we kind of argued about whether we should put leadership in here. But from your developers and your users, you got to have some leaders who actually run your little project. So they facilitate the collaboration. They set and communicate vision. You know, what are we trying to get out of this? They nurture that community, making sure everyone's getting along and everyone's happy and things are going on. They coordinate and organize the project. If there are true conflict, we should not put that period there. We need to put the period there. It has to be there. They'll come in and mediate. And they guide the technical direction. Where do we want to go with this?
And in large projects, you could have different people. So for example, in the Fedora project, there's a Fedora project leader and a Fedora operations architect and a Fedora community architect. And they serve with the Fedora Council, which delegates a lot of its responsibilities to the Fedora Engineering Steering Committee. Like there's a whole thing, right? And in a smaller project, you probably don't have all of those. But somebody's there doing that, right? It might just be your maintainer, your lead developer, but they're there providing kind of those leadership roles.
And now we're going to get into some bigger communities, not just that two-person community. So technical writers, I mentioned. Your project's gotten a little bigger. There's people who like to write. So they're going to document project features, functionality. They're going to manage and maintain the project documentation. So as a release comes, they're going to make sure your release notes are there. They're going to help create those developer resources based on that earlier documentation. And they're going to support community engagement. In this case, it could be blog posts or other things. Those aren't as technical, but they need good writing.
Guys, I love doing these tech conferences. Raise your hand if you actually have a background, like if your degree is in communications or you're actually like a technical writer. I love it. Okay,
We'll take a word.
One hand. I love this because it's like one or two or zero hands whenever I ask this. And developers get a bad rap for being bad at documentation, which can be true. But it doesn't have to be true. You do not need to be a communications major. You don't need to be a professional technical writer to write decent documentation. Developers can write good docs too. So please get involved in the docs.
And then other
help
people
out.
just clean them up. It makes it a whole lot easier. Now, I included infrastructure because I come from a larger project, and we have a foundation, and they actually pay for us to have infra people, but we also have volunteers. So they do the system administration and the maintenance on donated hardware. They develop and configure management. They do deployment and configuration management. They run the CI/CD, and they check to make sure we have enough nodes if we need to go back to a sponsor to find out if we need more donated nodes. But they oversee the general infrastructure that the project is running upon. Now, a lot of projects are using GitHub Actions. So they don't need this big infrastructure, but it does take place in a slightly larger community under a foundation. Now, we've hinted at really large communities. So we are lucky to have some graphic artists who create logos, have created our new mascot. And it's an opportunity with someone a totally different non-computer science related skill to get involved in an open source project. UI, UX, making sure the button is always on the right-hand side of the screen versus the left-hand side of the screen. So in your UI for your system, you don't hit the cancel when you really wanted to hit the save. A lot of people don't think about that, but UI, UX is very important if you're going to have a graphical interface. Promotional materials. You've got a conference coming up and you want to have like nice posters outside the room. And
you don't want me to draw them.
no.
Yeah.
Visual assets for the documentation, when you have a little chart of how your system flows, a lot of times they can do it. All right, translators. Open source is global. Everybody would be benefited by having their local language. So the ability for someone to come in and say, I can take this and I can put it in Mandarin. I can take this and put it into Japanese for you. Very handy skill sets. We're at 5 minutes, so we're going faster.
Yeah.
Community advocates. He's a community advocate. I'm a community advocate. I don't get paid to be one, sort of.
Don't you, though?
I'm an unofficial, official community architect. So they're the people who are going to go to the events a lot of times, or at least organize the presence at the event. They're going to give outreach. You can contact us at any time. We're going to answer your questions. We're going to help promote our project so that y'all adopt it. Feedback collection and communication could be running user surveys. If we don't know how our users are using our product or our project, we can't improve it for you. Promoting diversity and exclusion. I know this one's a little hot topic, but the more people you have in the room from different backgrounds, the more different thought process you have. As I mentioned, I am an animal science major. I do not think like a computer science person. So I ask questions differently, and they're like, I never thought of that. But they wouldn't, because they were taught to think a certain way, perhaps. So having those different backgrounds and skill sets are very important when trying to figure out what your community should be like and where your project might need to be tweaked and stuff.
I think it's a fantastic non-technical avenue to get involved in. So, and doing something like running a conference can be intimidating. It's definitely not your first contribution to run one, but there are places for you to get involved to help one, because running a conference is a lot of work, and there's a lot of hands that it took to lift this conference.
So we kind of ran through this. I know we're short on time. Questions? We're here to answer.
You mean to run the mic?
Okay. Oh, okay. Yes. And realistically, we did want to leave enough time for y'all to answer questions.
So my question is, how would you guys describe the general trend for open source in the next 10 years or in the future?
So it's actually really interesting. A lot of countries, especially in Europe, want all open source code. And that was something that was very beneficial to the small company I worked in Luxembourg, because the countries were saying, we want all new code to come in and be open source. So governments are very much into that right now, which gives a lot of stability to the open source projects. Cloud sovereignty, speaking from an OpenStack aspect, that means having your data in your data center and having full control over your code and your data. Again, if you're an open source project, that's very beneficial to meet those needs because you control everything. For us as, this is a little product-y, but as a company that bases everything on open source, we are not locking you into anything. And a lot of companies appreciate that, because if they say down the road they want to go somewhere else or use something else, they can migrate off. They're not locked into having anything in particular.
Yeah, and I think it's harder to predict the future than to predict the past. When both Amy and I got started, open source was like the scrappy underdog, I remember when it was hard to get people to even take anything seriously, and now you'd be hard pressed to find an industry that's not using open source somewhere. It's everywhere. Linux itself is embedded in a surprising number of places. And I don't see that reversing. I think we'll just continue to see open source be kind of the foundation. I do think a risk we have is that there was a certain aspect of kind of these open source communities that we grew up with when it was the scrappy underdog, that you can make something that is technically legally open source, but it doesn't have that same
Finished aspect.
well, it doesn't have the same community aspect to it. Sometimes things are developed behind closed doors, and then the source is available, and yes, it's open source technically, but it's not developed within the community. I think that's a trend that we have to watch out for, and I also think that obviously the rise of using generative AI tools changes a lot of things. And we need to be careful about how the contributions that come in are still respecting the open source licenses and is making room for humans to contribute, because you should be able to contribute and get an opportunity to form your career off of this stuff. And I cannot completely predict how the future is going to shake out with Gen AI. It's a disruptive new tool, and I don't have all the answers.
How do you handle the anxiety of like code quality, especially in your first few contributions from like beginner to intermediate?
Okay.
And then I'll go.
So I rarely write code professionally anymore, but I started out that way, right? So like if I'm writing codes these days, it's like scripts for myself or testing demo, stuff like that. But I remember like when I was making my first, that was extremely anxiety inducing. Like my first patches to GNOME when I was trying to, this is a psychological question you're asking me, is how to deal with the anxiety, right?
Mine's
Not a
gonna be
technical
totally
question.
different.
I don't know, man. Like you just do it. I think it helps to. Like at some point, you just like it's like rip off the Band-Aid and make that first. You're right. Submit that first MR, PR. It was we emailed patches around back in those days, but like you just have to kind of get over it and do it, and it becomes easier after you do it. I think the tips we gave about engaging with the community first, introducing yourself, maybe lurking a little bit and getting a feel for the culture. When you make friends within a project, that helps a lot. I have lifelong friends I made from my work within the GNOME project, and so that when you know you've got someone there who has your back, that helps immensely. But I don't want to diminish that. I get it. Like first 100 contributions can be very anxiety inducing. Yes.
I know I'm the moderator, but if I can add to your response. So I'm a manager, people manager at Red Hat of software engineers. I'm also an agile evangelist. And one of the things that attracted me to Red Hat was that the Red Hat and open source is that the values and culture of Red Hat and open source is very in sync with agile. And agile, the key thing to answer your question is that agile promotes taking risks, learning the lessons from mistakes, iterating and correcting, and improving the quality of what you're developing. So by following their guidance of getting involved in the community, learning the project members and connecting with them makes it a little easier to take that first risk and then learn and keep improving from then on.
All right, so I can go to a Python class and answer every one of the professor's questions to the class. I cannot start from a blank page.
Mm-hmm.
So I mentioned the translation code. Find something small. I mean, I can hack on someone and change their code. I can say I have Python code in Nova and in Barbican, which are compute and security within OpenStack. And you're like, Amy's got code in those. I have Python code in those. Why? Because it was a simple change that I had the skill set to do. And the confidence and also those communications, like going on the IRC channel and go, hey, I found this problem. I'm going to put a patch up. And, just putting it out there ahead of time. They all knew me. If I said there was a problem, there was a problem. But just taking that small chunk, not necessarily going, I'm going to put in the new feature that's going to rule the world.
Mm-hmm.
Fixing a small thing, getting that in, then taking the next small thing. And as you get that relationship with everyone else, it helps. For OpenStack, we have a review system using Garrett, which I love. Nobody else does. But we have things called review. Anyone can review and give a -1 or a +1. Then we have core, which are your maintainers. And we have the ability to give you a +2 or a -2. +2 is you're good to go. You need 2 of those. Then we give you a +1 workflow. -2 doesn't mean your stuff isn't good. It could be that we need a discussion to see where you're coming from. That's a new feature. Do you have a spec for it? So negatives on a review are not necessarily bad things. They may just be an avenue for communication. So always starting, in a community with more communication allows for understanding of where you're coming from when you do put a patch in.
And that's a really good point. Like the -1 isn't as a beginner, that -1 can feel gut wrenching. And sometimes those of us who have been doing this for a long time are just really busy, and we have a language of our own that's very efficient that isn't often beginner friendly. And so like a seasoned developer will just be like -1, and then you feel like, oh my God, I can't believe. But we didn't mean it that way.
But
We
a
just meant
-1
like
is-
go back and work on it, please.
But the minuses should also have some hint on what you need to fix.
Yeah.
Like the -2. You're going to need to open up a ref on this. Until you get that ref, we're not going to look at this any further. A -1 might be, especially in documentation, the language structure is a little off, and what I'll often do is also go, hey, how does this sound? A lot of times we also patch on top of other people's patches. If I have a working relationship with you, and I know you're okay with me just fixing your grammar, I'm just going to go ahead and fix your grammar. You still own the patch. You're still getting that contributor commit, but I'm going to fix it versus us going back and forth. Garrett recently put it in a nice feature that I use a lot more now, is just giving that suggestion. So instead of in a comment, me going, hey, what about wording it like this? I can actually give that rewording, and they can just accept it into their patch. And I'm just a commenter at that point. I didn't even put a patch in. So there's different tools that give you different abilities. But if you start small and you do something that you're confident, like it's not hard to put in a translation tag.
Mhm.
I enjoyed it. I sat there and did it for hours because I like that stuff. But it was a great way to get those first contributions.